Thank you for joining us today for this conversation, a conversation that affects all of us who at some stage are on or near Australia's roads. My name's Bill Woods. It's an honour to be hosting again this discussion about Fatality Free Friday and what we can do to ease the road trauma. And I come at this from a number of different angles. I've been experienced for many, many years now as a news journalist, so I've talked all too often about road trauma in Australia. I've also been a sports commentator, so I've worked in motorsport for many years as well, and that's important from the point of view of driver training and driver awareness. I'm also an ambassador for Subaru Australia, and of course I'm very proud of their association with the Australian Road Safety Foundation and their strong emphasis on safety. But also, like you, I'm an average road user, have been doing so for more than 40 years, and unfortunately I have witnessed firsthand the worst that can happen on our roads. Those stories are for another day. Today, though, the theme is the moment time stopped. And I'm really keen on the choice of this theme for 2025, because when you think about it, we've all had a moment away from tragedy. Consider when your heart skipped a few beats, when that kangaroo might have leapt out from the darkness late at night on a country road, or when you stepped off a pavement and didn't notice a car heading straight for you. Or when you were driving down a road innocently, doing the right thing, and a car came directly at you because someone attempted a risky overtaking manoeuvre. Or it could have been a moment where you had a lapse of concentration or took that risk. We've all been a moment away from tragedy, and sadly, that's all it takes. Earlier this month, our guests shared some very deep, personal stories about the true cost of road trauma in this country. And that session is available on the Australian Road Safety Foundation website and their Facebook page. But there are some numbers today that I want to emphasise. Stopping this year-on-year rise. Last year, 2024, 1,306 people killed on our roads, and that's the fourth consecutive year that the number has increased. Road trauma is also about surviving, life-threatening injuries, broken families, and traumatised first responders. We'll hear all about that today from people who know. Systems, attitudes, behaviours will all be under the microscope today, and we'll hear from people who are seeking accountability, action and prevention. And hopefully you can join us in that cause. Let's introduce our panel. Firstly, Russell White, founder and chair of the Australian Road Safety Foundation, a national leader in prevention, policy and public awareness. Next to him is Michelle Bain, Executive General Manager from AAMI, one of Australia's largest insurers and a long-standing partner in road safety education and innovation. The very important Assistant Commissioner, David Driver. Thank you, David, for representing New South Wales Police today. But most importantly, Katie Dokmanovich, who lost her son Nicholas to a preventable high-speed crash and has since become a passionate advocate for change with Road Trauma Support Group in New South Wales, and we thank Katie for joining us again this year. And Michelle Millen, whose son Cameron was tragically taken too soon when struck by a bus outside his school in 2023. This conversation is about honouring those who've already paid the price of our road trauma, but it's also about solutions and hopefully preventing other families from suffering as well. We'll start with you, Katie, if you don't mind, and thank you again for being here. You've said that your world changed forever, of course, in the moment that you lost Nicholas. Can you help us understand what that is like?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me again. My world stopped at 1:38 a.m. on Christmas Day. That was the time I received a phone call from Nicholas's girlfriend to say that he had been in a car crash and he was dead. For me, becoming a road safety advocate is something that I'm extremely passionate about. I don't want to meet any more mums or dads. Working with the Road Trauma Support Group means that I can guide people and help people on their journey and also lessen the impact of what they're about to go through.
Michelle Millen, you've also experienced these life-changing effects. Would you feel comfortable sharing that with us, how it affected you?
Sure. Well, firstly, I just want to correct that Cameron wasn't outside of his school. Cameron was 150 metres within school grounds, standing out the front of the school chapel and the school office. in a designated area waiting for collection. So I just want to make that clear. He wasn't on a public road. He was somewhere he should have been, entirely safe. My world stopped at 2:48 p.m. on the 15th of February 2023 when my 16-year-old son, Cameron's brother, Jared, rang me and said that Cameron had been hit by a bus at school. I live 3 kilometres from the school. I was on the school grounds within 10 minutes and watching paramedics perform invasive medical procedures on Cameron as they tried to keep him alive. I was standing across the road because the police wouldn't let me go to him as he was dying. Not only did my life stop in that moment, my son became the state's. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't recognise that at 2:48 p.m. I stopped being his mum to a certain extent. I became unentitled to information, and Cameron became a victim in a court case, and that needs to change. But that is the moment that my world ended.
Russell, how important is it that the road safety conversation encompasses these tragic stories?
Oh, Bill, I think it's incredibly important. In fact, I think it's often the missing piece is the real world story, the real world experience. And I think anybody who hears these stories or stories like them, you can't help but be moved by that. And I think it sort of strikes at the heart of the general. I always use the word apathy because I do think a lot of people just are on autopilot or think it'll never happen to them. And I think until we change the narrative around what responsibility is, and just being a bit more focused on what we're doing, more aware of the environment around us, more aware of the potential risks that are around any sort of vehicle, we really need to amplify that message. And that's why I think, discussions, conversations like this are so critical, because I think, as you said in your intro, we hear it a lot in the media about an incident that's happened, and then it sort of moves on to the next story. We're hearing just 2 examples today of how that, someone's story has changed permanently like that. And I think we've all got to do everything we can to try and turn that horrible thing around, to reverse that. It's the human story is the thing that goes beyond any figure or report we hear. It's real people with real families, and their loss is forever.
Michelle Bain, from the insurer's point of view, AAMI supports people in the aftermath of these crises. What are some of the unrealised effects that your teams experience, and what does road trauma mean to you?
I think having worked with my claims team and seeing the way that they support people who've been impacted by motor vehicle crashes, it's not just the injury at that particular point in time. Some of these, some people who are impacted, they're lifelong injuries that they've got to cope with. But there's also the impacts to family, to friends. I mean, we've got examples of that today with Katie and Michelle, and broader communities. And so many of these crashes that have occurred could have been prevented. And that's why I think this conversation today is really important. I think I also look at it from my team's perspective. They are dealing with people in very difficult circumstances, and in circumstances that were never expected. People don't prepare for these sorts of life-changing events, and the work that my team does in trying to provide the support we can at such a critical time is something that we are really passionate about at AAMI.
David Driver, thank you again for joining us. Road rules, rule enforcement, it's all a very important part of the picture, of course, but one focus that you'd like to see more on, I'm sure, and it's difficult for the police to enforce this, is driver education and driver attitudes. I talked earlier about awareness and training, the skills of driving, but we can't be guaranteed that we've got motor racing standard drivers all over Australia at any given time. So we've got to focus on awareness, education and defensive driving.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about driving skills. Driving skills is a perishable skill, and I think anyone who drives professionally would know that and understand that and know what that means. The other thing is, I think there's a genuine disconnect when people operate their vehicles, when they get into the car of a morning or motorcycle or truck, whatever it is, there's a genuine disconnect between their behaviour and the consequences that can flow from what is literally momentary inattention. And, we can talk about facts and figures, etc., but it doesn't hit at people's understanding. So when we talk about road trauma impacting, 340 people who have passed as a result of road trauma, plus the 10,000 plus hospital admissions, they're numbers, but those numbers are actually people. They're human beings. And when I talk about stopping distances and speeds, when I talk about 100 metres or 50 metres, it doesn't mean anything to people. But when I say if you glance down at your phone for a couple of seconds when you're travelling at 100 kilometres an hour, you've gone further than the length of an Olympic pool, and it takes you the length of a football field to stop your car from 100 kilometres an hour on a good day, take into account your reaction distance and your braking distance. And then when I say if it's raining, it's going to take a football field and a half, it actually means something. Or, whatever analogy we can draw that people can make a connection to. Because if I say 100 metres, most people can't gauge what 100 metres is. Yeah. So, I think there's that, as you said, in addition to the enforcement, to make sure that people comply with the rules, to give people the most opportune time to drive safely, but also understand what flows if they don't do that and the impacts that it has. And it's life-changing.
Russell White, to categorise what we've just been talking about, there is lazy driving, there's bad driving in that sense, but the intention is otherwise. But there is also risk-taking behaviour. You've tried very hard to change those attitudes. People who do things even when they know better. What strategies have you seen that actually work in this regard to help people like David Driver and, of course, Michelle and Katie?
Bill, it's such a broad approach, and I think we've got to look at a range of strategies, obviously, and clearly enforcement and vehicle design and all that sort of stuff. Engineering's all part of it, but I think the time's arrived now for us to focus on the capability of the individual to make a difference. Part of the campaign messaging this year is road safety needs you, and that's exactly what it really does need. Individuals making better choices, making better decisions. And our research certainly tells us that through campaigns, people do, there is a ripple effect of change through that. With any human behaviour thing, though, it's always going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy. And if I look at other things that have been successful in the community, historically, for other issues, and drink driving is probably a good one. That was decades and decades of campaigning, of lobbying, of gradually 1 degree shift. And I think we can do that again with the broader road safety picture. So for me, community action has always been the key. I've seen enough glimpses of that to realise that is possible. And I think as long as we continue to do the things we know work, like the road design and the vehicle engineering, and enforcement, that's all important. But I think we've got to empower people more about what the right thing is, and give them some better skills around understanding risk profile, situational awareness and that sort of thing. But I think we've also got the hard part of how community values safety at the moment. And, as you said in your intro, we've had 4 years of the road toll climbing. The 5 years before that, we didn't meet our road safety targets as a nation either. So something fundamental has to change. If we're going to turn this around, we have to look at community ownership and personal responsibility. And I think part of that is about reversing this, again, I call it this apathy that's out there around the risk of what could happen and just how quickly it can happen.
Michelle Millen, I know this is a sensitive issue, of course, but what would you say to someone who is tending to take risk-taking behaviour on the roads? What message do you have for them?
Just picking up on what David was saying about the disconnect between behaviour and the consequences. I think there's a disconnect between behaviour and your goal when you get behind the wheel of a vehicle. So since Cameron was killed, every time I get behind in my car, I stop for 1 second. I think about Jared or Jeff or Cam, and I say my goal is not to get to the train on time. It's not to get to work on time. It's not to get to the party on time. My goal is to get to my destination safely.
guys.
That changes how I drive. I don't change lanes as often. If someone comes and cuts me off, I don't follow them to teach them a lesson. I don't rush to get to the train on time. I get the next train. So I think if we change our goal when we get behind the car, the bus, the truck, and we say my goal is just to get somewhere safely because I have someone that cares about me or someone I care about, the behaviour will follow. You don't have to sit there. I'm not naive enough to think that Cameron's story will stay in people's brains much past this event. But if you have someone you care about, just make the goal to get to them safely.
Right. Yeah, sure, David.
I did an interview recently, and an extension of what you just said is that we wouldn't go out of our way to put a child at risk. You know, we're very keen to protect children. All of us are. It's an innate human feeling. But every road user is someone's child. Mm-hmm. So don't put someone's child at risk.
It's about coming up with some basic thought processes that will not only sink in, but enable people to very simply make those little adjustments that could mean the difference between life and death. Michelle Bain, corporate responsibility. What role do organisations like AAMI play in encouraging these safer choices?
I think picking up on Russell's point before, education is really important. And if we can give people tips as to what they need to think about, then I think that that's really helpful. The community activation piece is really important, and we're really proud to have been partnering with Australian Road Safety Foundation since 2007, and there's lots of different campaigns that we've been involved in, obviously Fatality Free Friday, but also the Rural Road Safety has been a really big one. And we've also got the AAMI Crash Index, which is an annual research piece that we put out around roads around Australia, which again is meant to provide information to people so that they can have top of mind how they can drive safely and where some of the dangers are.
Katie, you've been at this for quite a while now, and I really commend you on how difficult that must have been. What has advocacy meant for you, particularly with the young people you work with? This has been a really interesting focus for you and a very important one.
Yeah, it has. So currently I present to hundreds of school kids on a weekly basis with the aim of making sure that I never have to meet their families. I never have to sit in a room and counsel their mum or their dad or their siblings. I think it's really important that people are aware that it can happen to anyone. You know, Nicholas was a passenger. He was an innocent person. He went out for dessert and he didn't come home. And our world changed forever on that day. So I think it's really important to have the human stories, to put a face to the number, because you hear these numbers every day and people just go, oh, well. But once you actually see it as a collective of 300 people or 1,300 people, you actually see how much of an effect that has on not just the families, but the broader community. So it's really important to get these kids to have a think, to put themselves in my situation and imagine me as being their mum. And quite often, a lot of the feedback is after they've completed a full day program, hearing the mum's story or the dad's story, because there's a couple of us who do it, is the most important and powerful piece that they take away from the event.
Russell White, Fatality Free Friday. I've talked about it on the radio and people get a bit cynical about absolutes. I find that a bit disheartening, but how do you keep the momentum going? It's something to strive for, and that's the important thing.
And Bill, I think we do need to have simple campaign messages and targets to give people something to rally around. You know, Fatality Free Friday is more than one day. You know, it's a month long of campaigning. It's about sharing stories like we're doing today. It's about, I guess, trying to keep road safety always on the agenda, because it's very easy for it to slip off, you know. And if I talk about an apathy, that's sometimes the thing that really grinds my gears, is how quickly it seems to fall off the radar. You know, it's a national emergency. We are, if it was any other issue, we'd be having public outcry about it because of the numbers and the impact and the sheer scale of it. So really, Fatality Free Friday is this call to action every year. It's about trying to have, you know, just a single Friday where there is no road fatalities. And traditionally, a Friday is a very dangerous day. Around 5 or 6 Australians will lose their lives every single Friday. So the goal was always, if we can prove we can do it for a single day, then there is no reason why we can't do it, every single day and have a future that's free of road fatalities. So it is about endurance. I'll be honest, it is something we keep lobbying at every single year, but the campaign is about community. And I often, again, reinforce that fact that police, government can only do so much. It's the choices we're making as individuals. And I think, again, the time's come for a cultural change around how we view risk and how we view road use in general. Again, just through, as we said in the intro, people just doing silly things and not thinking of the consequence. And I think we hear very powerfully today what the consequence can be for either a bad choice or bad behaviour.
Amy has plenty of resources, Michelle Bain, tech, data, education, supporting community programs like this one and Party. Why is it important that these road safety initiatives focus on education and awareness?
I think the education and awareness piece is one, if people have power, if they're actually thinking about the effects of what could happen if they don't pay attention behind the wheel, then I think it actually creates more mindfulness and potentially less accidents. And we know that you've done research, Russell, at Australian Road Safety Foundation, which found that when people actually have top of mind road safety, then they're more likely to drive more safely. One thing that we've been investing in at AAMI is our AAMI Safe Driver app. And what you can do on the app at the moment is we'll go in there and allow the app to track using telematics your driving. And the good thing about that is that using AI and data analytics, it will provide feedback to drivers around how they're driving when they're not driving safely and tips. And what we've found over a period of time, I think we've tracked about 270 million kilometres of data, is we've been able to give feedback on things like heavy braking, unsafe lane changes, that kind of thing. And what we've found is people have actually read their results and changed behaviour over time. So again, that knowledge is power, and people are taking action off the back of understanding how safely they're driving.
Michelle Millen, once again, we appreciate how difficult this has been for you. And listening to this conversation, we've talked a little bit about the importance of remembering Cameron. Where do you see this going in the future? Katie's been working with young people. Of course, his memory is so important in this picture.
Yeah, well, Cameron's story hasn't been told yet. We haven't been able to tell Cameron's story because we've been caught up in police investigations and criminal proceedings. So we're only just getting started to tell Cameron's story. What happened to Cameron was diabolical. He was killed by a professional driver. My husband and I are getting to the bottom of what that means in this country and this state in terms of training. I'd like to see data on how many indicators we get before somebody, by people's driving behaviour, particularly professional drivers, that we should be tracking and monitoring. I want to see the data on how many indicators we get before somebody gets killed, because in our case, people knew that this person was not fit to be a professional driver, but we're having to investigate that ourselves. So I think Cameron's story is really important because he wasn't a road user. He's 14 years old. He went to school. He came out of math class. He high-fived his brother. He turned around to talk to a friend and a bus ran him over in front of his brother. I nearly lost both my sons that day. Jared watched his 14-year-old brother and his best friend die.
How was he doing?
He's not great. He's not great. I mean, I didn't just lose one son that day. I lost two. I have to, at my weakest, parent a 16-year-old boy who's now 18 through something that I don't even understand. I have to explain police investigations going wrong and court case decisions to 17, 18-year-old that I've always taught there's consequences to your actions. Turns out not all the time. So no, he's not doing well, but he's resilient, he's strong, he's a brilliant young man. So we've got hope, but yeah, he's not good.
Well, our thoughts are with you, of course. David, I have to, obviously, Michelle's raised a few issues there, so I have to come back to you. Obviously, law enforcement's very important. That's your job. But in this suggestion that if we can somehow measure indicators, we're talking, of course, about professional drivers here who have licences that have certain conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So there can be some regulatory control there, but I don't know how you go about doing that, whether the onus is on the industry they work for, the police itself. That is an administrative and very complex issue, but it's an interesting one to bring up.
Look, it's part of a complete system. We have to look at road safety in its entirety. So I think as a community, as stakeholders in road safety, and everyone who uses our road, and I appreciate your son was on private property, but we have to look at it holistically. And we need, as a community, we need to pull every possible lever to reduce the road trauma. So, if regulations are brought in, administered by Transport, either Transport New South Wales or the transport industry, the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, and then we're an enforcement arm. We enforce the laws of the state. I think probably one of the things that we can do better is work more collectively to make sure that all of our efforts continue down that one path towards improved road safety. If we rely totally on enforcement, we will fail. If we rely totally on education or engineering solutions for roads, we will fail. It has to be a combined effort because there are so many different contributing factors to collisions and road trauma. And sometimes there's 3 or 4 in one incident, whether it be alcohol, drugs, excessive speed, lack of restraint, distraction, all of that can occur in one incident. So we need everything working together to eliminate what is this road trauma. And you mentioned the statistic earlier, and I don't like using the term statistics because they're human beings, they're people that are loved. And anyone who's lost a child will tell you it's pain on a new level. Nothing compares to it. So we had 85 murders last year in the state of New South Wales, but we had 340 people lose their lives on our roads. So when you look at the difference and you look at the impact on our community, and every loss of life is terrible. And I'm not diminishing anyone who has lost a loved one in any shape or form or in any way. But at the end of the day, everyone who loses a loved one, there is a vacant seat at the table, there is a hole in their life. And we can prevent that if we do this better.
And I'll just tell you that there's no difference to me between dangerous driving and murder. We don't have vehicular homicide here, but from our perspective, Cameron was killed at the hands of someone else. They made a decision to kill him that day. So it feels like a murder to us. It's not softened by the fact that it's road trauma.
To all our panellists, I think we'll make it simple for the camera operators and start here and work across, if you don't mind. Russell, firstly, policy, technology, public behaviour. I mean, we've all been across all these things in various ways. What will have the biggest impact on reducing road trauma in the next 5 years, in your opinion?
Bill, it's a tricky question because, as we've heard, the complexity of it is so diverse. I think one of the things I would like to appeal to is for the federal government to take a really serious look at this issue, treat it like a national crisis, which it is, and then in doing that, try and set some leadership standards to collaborate with the states, to collaborate with others, but really put a line in the sand. As I said, we've seen it with other issues, whether that's environment or other things. So to have a real think tank, an engaged community think tank around it, and set some policy. And I think as part of that, could then look at one of the areas I think we have got enormous capability in, is in this area of fleet safety and professional drivers, because there are workplace legislation laws that are already there that require organisations, people driving for work purposes, those same OH&S laws apply, but they're never really acted on. So for me, I think I'm really urging the federal government to take this issue extremely seriously. And I think from the quickest result we could possibly get, I think that OH&S work-related fleet safety area is something that we could really pursue.
Michelle Bain, your thoughts?
I think for me, education around that active choice every time someone is near a road, whether they're driving, whether they're a pedestrian, to actually think about how they can be safe, not only for them and their family, but for the broader road users. I've got a son at the moment who's learning how to drive, and every time he gets behind the wheel, I remind him that a car is like a weapon, and it's an incredible privilege and a big responsibility when you get in the car to make sure that you're safe. And I think to Michelle's point before, to not be rushing, to choose to actually drive safely, to put your phone down and to ensure that you get to your destination safely for yourself, but also for others.
David, driver.
Yeah, I think that's a two-pronged question. And what we can do immediately right now is the attitude of appreciating the risk when we get in the vehicle every single time. You know, there's a system of car control that those that have been trained understand, and there's a methodology that I still do 40 years later. The other thing is the technology. You know, we don't make cars in Australia, but if I was to import something that was going to change lives and make things easier and better, but the downside was all this trauma, I'm not sure I'd be permitted to bring it into the country in the first place. Now, I'm not saying we should ban vehicles, but you know, if we think about that, I wouldn't be allowed to bring something in the country that probably did this much damage. So I think longer term technology, because I think there's opportunities that exist now, particularly if the vehicle is in the hands of an unauthorised driver, to remotely reduce its ability to travel at high speed, or indeed be operated by someone who's fatigued or affected by alcohol. And I think then there's the incentive that insurance agencies can offer people who buy vehicles with those safety features, which will then drive demand for the manufacturers quicker than any Australian design rule compliance. But that could be another opportunity as well.
I bring this subject up a lot when I'm on Talkback Radio, and interestingly, two things that do stand out in the feedback I get through texts and phone calls. One is the general aggression on the roads that people are seeing, and they're quite confronted by it. The other one is, and it's more of a suggested solution, but I know it's a very difficult one, is police visibility. That comes up a lot when I hear feedback from people. They want to see more police visible on the roads, but I know that's a very big issue in itself in terms of cost and personnel.
Yeah, look, we have lifted our profile in recent times, and we've just run 3 statewide operations. In fact, I got a call yesterday and a text from some people that said, you know, they are seeing more police around. The challenge with relying on enforcement, though, it's one prong in the fork of any road safety strategy. And even if we doubled the number of police, we still couldn't cover every street all the time across the state. Our state is very large. So we have to, again, consider it as an ecosystem of road safety, and relying on one element, such as enforcement, is not the way to go.
When you think about it, you shouldn't have to do it. In an ideal world, you shouldn't even have to be out there.
Yeah, it's a bit by the bull by the tail.
Yeah.
We need to change, stop the behaviour in the first place by people willingly comply with our road rules. And look, in fairness, most people do. When we look at the number of registered vehicles, licence holders, the kilometres travelled, most people do the right thing most of the time. Unfortunately, the nature of the activity of driving vehicles is that it can be one moment in attention that changes a life.
Yep, that one moment. Katie.
Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with everything that everyone has already previously spoken about, but I think it's accountability and holding your peer group, your people, your family, holding them to account that every time they are using the road, they are putting somebody's life at risk. You know, I have the same. I have an almost 17-year-old son who is learning to drive, and it's a constant thing. Just because the speed limit says 70 doesn't necessarily mean that you need to drive at 70. Teaching them to, you know, drive to conditions. Some of our roads are not kept in the best condition, unfortunately, especially in rural New South Wales, where 60 to 70% of our deaths are occurring in this area. So I think it's really, really important that, you know, as a community, we hold each other to account, because right now, unless attitudes change, nothing's going to change. And if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same result. So I think it's really, really important to hold, you know, our friends and especially our family to account.
I get that feedback too. We're not driving at the speed limit. Well, it's called a limit, not a set speed.
Exactly.
It's remarkable. People feel like they have to drive at what the sign tells them. Michelle.
Just picking up on what David was talking about, would you bring a car into the country if you knew the potential damage? I think one of the things I find most frustrating now that this has become our lives is just how many times the courts allow repeat offenders back behind the wheel as though it's a right, an entitlement to drive. It's a privilege. We live in a country, I live in an area where it would be very difficult to navigate around without a licence. But if you are continually, if I had a gun and treated it the way that repeat offenders treat a motor vehicle, I wouldn't be allowed back in the community with a gun. But we keep allowing repeat offenders that don't respect the road back behind the vehicle, and it's coming at the cost of people's lives.
I'm sure very frustrating for the personnel under David Driver too in a lot of cases. Russell White, finally we'll ask all of you one more question too, just to conclude today's discussion. The one piece of behaviour, I can think of about 10, but let's keep it to one piece of behaviour you'd like to see stop on Australian roads right now.
I think distraction's a massive one. There's no doubt about that. But I also think people just not being present. So my advice to people is be in the now, like be conscious about what you're doing. And the interesting thing with human beings, we can't all concentrate 100% of the time. There will be moments where you sort of lapse your concentration, but keep trying to bring yourself back to the present is probably one of the big things. And I think just it relates probably to what Dave was saying before. It's not so much the risk of getting caught doing the wrong thing, it should be the risk of the crash. And I sort of encourage people, change the mindset about how you behave when nobody's watching, when there is no police officer, there is no camera there. How are you behaving when no one's watching? Because that'll ultimately dictate how well you perform and how safe you are as a road user long term.
Michelle Bain.
I think distraction, I can't go past that one because I feel like our society is so full of people rushing to get everywhere. They're on their phones. There's lots of, things going on. And I think if people can slow down, focus on just driving or crossing the road by putting your phone down and just being aware of your surroundings, I think that would make a big difference.
On the way here this morning, I saw a young driver, that's all I'll say in terms of description, in a car, go 3 blocks through 3 sets of lights with their head down the whole time. I can't prove it, but the head was down, and the way they were moving around in their lane, they were obviously looking at some kind of device. Maybe the cameras picked them up, David Driver, you don't know. There are plenty of them around these days. What are your thoughts? What's the one behaviour that you want to see stop?
If I could sum it up in one word, I'd use the word complacency, which is a similar theme to what's been said. When we do another dangerous activity, I was fortunate enough to be in the police rescue squad for 10 years. So I abseiled, used chainsaws, etc. And when you're up from a high building or a cliff, you check your gear very carefully before you go over. Similarly, when you operate a chainsaw, you make sure that all the safety protocols and where you stand and how you hold it, etc., and your PP, it's all done. We need to do that every time we get in the car. There's a level of complacency and people will think, oh no, I'll do that from the car, drink my coffee, make that phone call, do whatever. So I agree that it's so important that when we get into those vehicles, the only thing we should be concentrating on is driving that vehicle.
Katie Dokmanovich.
I think attitudes, whether it be your attitude to what you're doing, like everyone else is saying, driving to the conditions, driving in the moment, but your attitudes to your other road users. Everybody has a right to get home safely. Everybody has a right to get to their destination without being, tailgated, aggressive behaviours, that constant fear of, that truck behind you not stopping because he's too busy on his phone as well. So I think attitudes is a really, really big one, and the fact that people think it won't happen to them.
Michelle Millen.
Well, David literally stole my analogy. My husband and I were talking last night about the gun analogy. You wouldn't walk around with a gun the way that you get in your vehicle, and total complacency. So I suppose I'll just add, an appreciation for the fact that when you drive, you're doing something that's difficult. I'm trying to get my 18-year-old son to drive because unfortunately or fortunately he has a real appreciation for what can happen if he gets it wrong. So he's actually the opposite to a lot of young men, and he's overly sensitised to it. But in teaching him, you get reminded that it's not simple to drive. There's a lot of things to concentrate on. So I think we just all need to remember that when we get behind the wheel, in addition to everything that's already been said, that what you're doing is difficult, so you shouldn't be able to operate a phone while you're driving.
Michelle Millen, Katie Dokmanovich, thank you so much. I know it's not easy to do these things, but we really appreciate it. It's very important. David Driver, thank you. Michelle Bain, thank you. Russell White, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
This is what happens when time stops. You've heard some pretty confronting stories today from a number of different perspectives. The breadth of road trauma is devastating, and as you've also heard, it's a very complicated issue. There are a lot of things we need to look at, but one thing is for sure, we can all contribute to this. Safe travels to you too when you're next on the road or near the road, and thank you very much for being with us today.